Nicolas De Porcel is a diamond mastering engineer who's worked with artists like RODDY RICCH, KENDRICK LAMAR, DABABY, Baby Keem, and so many more. In today's video, I'll be interviewing him about how he got started, his mastering process, mastering Kendrick Lamar while working a 9-to-5 job, and the magic loves number of diamond selling records. Stay tuned because in 2 days, I'll be uploading an exclusive mastering breakdown of RODDY RICCH's twin, Feet Little Dirk, with Nicolas De Porcel. How did you get started in mastering?
Um, it's a long story. So I've been producing since I was 12 years old, and I started off just like most people do in Fruity Loops and working through every other software there is. I got to a point where I crossed over from producing like mostly rap and hip hop type stuff to producing EDM, and so I was putting out a lot of solo singles, and I was like, fluent in sound design. I was fluent in mixing, but mastering, I never understood. So I would always send my stuff out to mastering engineers, and I sent it out to like the entire spectrum of people who, had like serious discographies. And I would get something back. I'd get a master back, and I'd be like, oh, okay, my top end is gone. And like, this is an electronic record, so it needs that like top end, and like, it needs to feel like electrified, And so I would like ask for a revision, like, hey, can we get this like back more like my mix? And like, in a lot of the cases, like the mastering engineer wouldn't respond. It would be like someone's assistant or like the front of house person, and they'd tell me something like, oh no, it's right, and I would like have to go edit the master. I would like be editing masters myself, so I'd get the master back, and I would like be shelving out top end and stuff and trying to like get it to sound how I wanted it to sound. And after a while, it got to a point where I was like, well, I'm like spending my entire paycheck, because at the time, I'm investing all the money I was making at work into my own, my own music. And so I started buying up mastering gear, because I was like, I think I could do this myself. I think I could do it myself. And then one day someone asked me to master something, and it occurred to me like, oh, maybe I have a desirable sound. There's obviously a demand. So like, someone wants me to do this. And then like, as time went on, like demand ramped up. The clients I was working for kind of ramped up, and I was basically put in touch with big name mixing engineers who were like asking me to master stuff. And from there, it kind of snowballed into like, oh wow, now I quit my job and do this for a living.
Yeah, nice. So, do you have like a musical background? I mean, I know you said you produce and stuff, but did you play any instruments growing up? Did that have like an influence on your mastering at all? I see you have a piano right on your workstation.
Yeah, I've been playing piano since I was a little kid. Taught mostly self-taught, until my grandpa came around and started actually like teaching me classical piano and like music theory and that type of stuff. But yeah, lifelong musician. I did an interview last night actually,
Mm.
and I was explaining like my mom's side of the family. My grandpa was always in like the church choir for like his entire life until he died. And then on my dad's side of the family, that grandpa was like always, into digital music. And he actually attended one of the first electronic music conferences in the 1970s. He's actually the one who like introduced me to digital music. And he always had a studio. Like I remember being 8 years old and being in his like little studio in the garage, and he had all these mixers. And back then, like all the machines were like MIDI devices, so they were like MIDI rack machines, and he had like multiple computers, like trying to get the sound that we can get on a laptop in like 30 seconds. These days it took like 2 hours. So yeah, I have it going back definitely going back there. And then my dad, like when for as far back as I can remember, has been singing and playing guitar with me and my little brother. So, and my little brother plays guitar, and yeah, we just it's like a language to us. I
Yeah.
feel like we just it's always been around. It's always been there. Like my hands just know how to move.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that help you with like, I guess, ear training and stuff and selecting different frequencies and songs and stuff based on the key? I know that's
Yeah,
something
I
you do,
mean,
right? Just having
yeah,
that
it's
knowledge.
yeah. If you've seen any of like my TikTok breakdowns on like EQing and that kind of stuff, we a lot of times when engineers are exposed to engineering language, we talk very much in terms of like frequency and amplitude and pan, but like fail to realize that like frequencies are notes,
Yeah.
and like when I'm thinking about how um sound is being generated from like my speakers and that kind of thing, like it comes down to like is what I'm doing musical, or is what I'm doing like mechanistic sounding and not musical. And I try to make my mastering as musical as possible, where I'm like taking out things that are maybe not desirable, or like masking things that are like out of harmony with whatever root notes are being played or whatever, and accentuating the things that are super musical. And I feel like this approach helps me to deliver a product that people get back and are like, whoa, how did I didn't hear that element. Like I'm trying to bring out things that they didn't even hear in the production, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, from what I understood watching some previous interviews and stuff, you are self-taught in mastering, right? Is that
Yep,
correct?
that's correct.
So,
Yeah.
like, how did you go about doing that? Like, what did you have any uh like what books did you read or stuff like that? What resources did you use to learn
Um,
mastering?
yeah, no, it's a good question. I definitely do not have a conventional approach to like, I was someone's assistant for 30 years until they
Yeah.
died, and then now I'm like the guy. I don't like letting other people block what I believe I'm capable of,
Mm.
not to come off as arrogant. It's just like I, we have control of our own paths and our own destinies. But yeah, I've been just honestly, I've just been fucking around since I was a little kid, So when I first started and got Fruity Loops, like I went into every single demo song, and I would like analyze and break down every single demo. I'd be like, okay, how'd they do this? And if you break it down from beginning to end, like you'll see each element of the production process. Like, okay, they recorded this live instrumentation. Well, they didn't. You actually couldn't record in Fruity Loops back in the very first version that I used. That was like I don't
Yeah.
know when they introduced recording audio, but it definitely wasn't the first version. But you could see how they like played everything in MIDI, and how they layered tracks, and how they arranged everything, and then how they were mixing everything. And then on the master bus, what they were doing on the master bus to like get everything mastered and sounding polished. And so I started from there. And as it evolved, like I went through each stage of the production process, like, learning music theory, how to play, like what that means, to recording, to mixing. And then in those stages, when I was like doing all that, I got really heavily into sound design because of electronic music, right? So I got to a point where I was almost like, wow, I can make anything sound like anything just from like the initialized patch on the VST. And that opened my mind to other possibilities in how things were being processed, not only in like the initial recording and production phase, but like in the mix, and then finally the master. um, I used to watch a ton of Luca Predalesi interviews, or not interviews, breakdowns, when
Yeah.
those became popular, because he was big in EDM back then. But I picked up this book. Actually, I think Demetrius might have it, but it's a mastering audio by Bobcats, and I've had every version since, and it keeps being updated with newer information as like the technology advances, right? As well as like a handful of other books. Home Recording Studio, Build It by like the Pros by Roger Vase. That helped me to develop an understanding of acoustics and like what my room needed to look like when I eventually built it, as it tied back into every phase of the production process, from mastering all the way back to, you know, the initial playing of the music.
Yeah, cool. So you talk about like you know, you were just talking about analyzing stuff from when you were young, analyzing the FL demos. Do you still go back today and analyze like different masters by other mastering engineers or masters by records that you really like to see what, you know, they did?
Yeah, I mean, I recently downloaded a bunch of new, well, and I mean recently, like in the past like year or two, downloaded a bunch of references from hdtracks.com, because they actually sell the mastered waves on there, and you can download them in their fullest resolution. I even like null tested my own files that have been uploaded to there to see if it was my masters that were uploaded,
Oh
and they were. So
wow.
they're selling, yeah.
Yeah.
So I tested to make sure they were like selling the actual masters, and they are. And so I have these references. Like some of these songs are like legendary songs, you know,
Mm.
Bruno Mars and that type of stuff. And I just went and analyzed like a bunch of different mastering engineers' work. And what's really cool about the technology that we have today, especially in Magic Sequoia, is I can right click a file to calculate loudness, and it outputs all these different parameters.
Mm.
That gives me more information into the specs that the mastering engineers delivered those files at, which is really interesting. So if you're going in there trying to analyze Diamond Records, like there is a pattern, you know.
Mm.
There's a pattern to what people are doing, delivery wise, and there's also like a level of variation that like is cool to see across these different mastering engineers that have like achieved these sounds and that level of notoriety, which is like what I'm more interested in these days. Like how can this sound be timeless, you know? How can it like live for 50 years?
Yeah, that's cool. I know you mentioned like patterns that the Diamond records have. Like, is there a like, I guess one that you've noticed, an observation that you could share?
Yeah, a lot of Diamond records are delivered at 9-ish lufs, -9.
So,
So yeah.
so the magic lufs exists. The magic.
Well, that's the other the thing to there's more to it than just that,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I know, I know.
it's a lot of like arrangement, because like you could have a vocal track with no drums that'll be read out lower in terms of loudness, but sound like very similar. So I think there's more to it than just like the specs. The spec delivery of the files has a
Yeah.
lot to do with, you know, like the chord progression and the actual content of the song. But I think that this myth that like the harder you push it, the louder it is, like is just that. Like it's just a myth.
Mm.
Like louder doesn't equal high replayability value.
Cool, cool. So, in your mastering career, what do you think was like the first? What was your first like major label master or kind of significant record that you mastered?
Um, my first major label credit was in 2019 with Boz EP, Spilled Milk.
Mm.
And that, I mean, from there, that's kind of, I guess if you go back, I did do The Heart Part 4 by Kendrick in 2017. And although that wasn't like, I didn't have listed credit on that, that
Mm.
was like the thing that started off working with major label type clients.
How did you end up landing that original Kendrick gig?
I had a friend, Cyrus, who was assisting Mix by Ali,
Mm,
and they couldn't get, like, they were working late at night to like try to finish a record, and they couldn't get in touch with any like other mastering engineers. And they needed the master. Like the song was coming out in the morning, and so they called me at like 11 at night. I was working at my job. I used to work a shift until 2 a.m. and I was managing people. I was managing 50 people at the time, and like um, I knew what like the impact was, and I was just like, I had to figure it out. How do you leave 50 people by themselves to work?
yeah.
So I just left and got it all covered and figured out. And I worked until 9 in the morning. They were sending back versions, and like I had never like worked like this with anyone before. And I was doing like tons of masters, and they would like give me a mix update, master again, and then finally at 9 in the morning it was approved after like I started work that day.
Yeah.
And I think we used to start at like 1 p.m. Like, so I went from 1 p.m. at one job all the way to 9 a.m. at the next job, trying to figure it out.
Cool, cool, cool. And so, I know you said you weren't credited on that, right?
Well, I mean, I was, but not like officially listed on like the
Okay,
liner
okay.
notes, like like how Title does.
Yeah. So I had a question about Mixed by Ali. I know I looked at some of your first credits and I see that he's like a mix engineer on a lot of them. So how did you, I guess, build a relationship with him? It seems like you guys, he had you on for like the engineers interview, so it seems like you guys have a pretty good relationship. And yeah, how did you get to
Yeah,
know
I
him?
mean, he is, in my opinion, one of the best engineers to ever do it, and especially like in what modern music is today, like he definitely has a heavy influence in the sound of that. So basically, like our relationship has been one of like, hey, how could I help be of service to you? You know what I'm saying? And my job with him specifically is like to keep his mixes as transparent as possible and not like overthink um, decisions on like should I cut this bass out, like should never be asking myself like should I cut this bass out, like
Yeah,
that's the one thing. So keeping his low end intact, and then just like um like not being afraid. He talks about it in some of the interviews, like I don't just like get a record from anyone and be like, okay, I'll just master this. Like I'll hear it, and on my first listen I'll be like, do you think the vocals need to come up a little bit, um or whatever mix changes I think need to be had, and like being bold and having that conversation rather than just mastering it and sending back whatever they give me. Like we have an open dialogue and a good rapport back and forth with each other to
mm.
help us like take the record to where it could go, rather than just like finish things out and turn them in.
Yeah, it's cool to hear that y'all have that dialogue. Do you feel like that? I mean, do you have that dialogue with all types of clients and different mix engineers? And do you think that's something that's separates you from other mastering engineers you have? You know, you said you were a producer, you did mixing, and you have, all that experience and stuff in the different fields, and you can
I
comment on
mean, that,
stuff.
like, going back to my origin story, that's kind of why I got into mastering, is because like people weren't having the dialogue, it would get cut off. And what I know about working with independent artists, especially today, seeing like the success of just for instance this year, Hours and Hours by Money Long, like that song came out independently, went number one on the R&B charts, like is now nominated for 2 Grammys independently. Like could you imagine if we if Prizzy and I were engineering that together and been like, ah, fuck it, just send it back. It's an indie client. Send it,
Yeah,
send back whatever.
yeah,
It's not like that at all. It's like, hey, do you think this could be brought up? Hey, how do we achieve the best result? And giving everyone like that hires us the opportunity to like achieve that sound rather than like, oh, it's A-list artist so and so, I'm going to try extra hard. Like that's so unfair to the people who hire me, because I feel like sometimes the people who hire me need me to go extra hard on their stuff to get it to sound good. um so like I give whatever effort it takes with all artists. I don't just say, hey, this is like going to be a big record, it's, you know, done by so and so, I'm going to try extra hard on it. It just, I don't like doing that. Like the dialogue has to be open with the engineer or the artist or the producer, no matter who it is, because today I don't know what you're going to be tomorrow. You know, you could be the biggest artist in the world tomorrow.
Cool, cool, cool. So, I wanted to ask you about a specific credit with you and Ali. Ali mixed it, the box. Like that was obviously like a massive song, and so how did that change your career? Did that lead into a number of other mastering gigs? Having that song.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but that song definitely like changed a lot of lives, I feel like. And to like put in perspective, oh man, what song? I want to say, I want to say Billie Jean by Michael Jackson just went diamond.
Oh,
And when was that song released?
a long time ago.
Yeah, so 1982, that song was released. 40 years later, it went diamond, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong on that. I'm pretty sure that's the case. The box went diamond in just 2 years, right? So what is that like? Uh, in a, I don't even know. I can't think of it right now. But in a fraction of that time, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the longest, it's one of the only songs, there's only 40 songs or so that have charted for 10 plus weeks at number one on the Billboard charts. So that solidified like my place in the industry, like as far as like mastering, you know what I'm saying? Because there's not many records that have done that. And if you just look at how it translated, how it was received, it definitely changed my life. It's changed the lives of the other engineers who work here as well, you know, because now we all have opportunities to like show what we're capable of.
Cool. You said the other engineers who work here as well. So I've seen you in some interviews like mention different members of your team, like Demetrius, I think you just mentioned. So what does your team look like, and what does it take to kind of manage like a mastering house brand like this?
Yeah, I mean, we're still very like our approach is, there's been such established mastering for so many years, you know, 60 plus years in the industry, that we're here to kind of disrupt and to do things differently than how they've been done conventionally. And so we, you know, myself hailing from Silicon Valley, like in the Bay Area, we're big on disrupting shit. Like even in the music scene, you look at how the Bay Area music scene is structured. A lot of the artists, especially in rap and hip hop, are independent, right? And like they don't use the conventional model of like, all right, let's have the major label backing this, and the major label doing this for us. And a lot of that stuff is like run through Empire down there. We take kind of the same approach to like, all right, there's no conventional way to not only engineer, but to bring in work as well. And so what it looks like as far as the team is, Demetrius does like most all my assisting, and what that looks like is so I'll work all day, right, on an album, and at the end of the day, someone will say, okay, the album is approved, like 11 p.m. at night, the album is approved, we need the cleans by tomorrow morning. Well, I've just been awake for fucking 20 hours trying to finish this album. Like, there's no way I could run all these cleans in analog. And so Demetrius comes in and he runs all the alts overnight, or whatever that means. Like, however we can get those run at the same, and doing the same exact recall and like getting them over to the label. That's like how we operate. And Demetrius now is breaking off into his own career and doing his own mastering. And we have our other assistant, Kayla, kind of helping both of us, right? So like Demetrius does a job and now Kayla is like assisting. So like we kind of have our training and our development is very rooted in like, all right, go back into the archives and see how this master was done. And so as they're running these recalls, they're getting a chance to see at every stage, like, okay, this was the move that was made. This was the move that was made. Oh, interesting. Why did they do that? You know? And they're getting to like learn and develop, as well as like take on their own clients and work in this studio, which is like when you leave the room, it's just like I don't know, nothing translates as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's cool. Now I think I heard you mention like another interview you had a Dolby Atmos engineer. Am I wrong about that? Or
No, you're right. So that's Brendan. He's the professor. He's actually he was a digital audio professor, and he worked at a local college over here, and he's done a ton of work in Brazil. He used to own a studio in Brazil, and he's been nominated for like a bunch of Latin Grammys and that kind of stuff. And he's actually like, so as far as the dynamic of the team, he is the one who knows all the theory behind audio, right? Like you could ask him any question about the science of audio and he understands it. So for us, it's like a perfect fit in terms of, you were asking earlier about like, did I have a mentor or anything like that? No, but I have peers that I lean on that sometimes, and in a lot of cases, know more than I do. And when I don't know something, I could just ask, right? So he's kind of a perfect fit here. And yeah, he's on the leading edge of the Dolby Atmos mastering front. And I think, I don't know if you listen to a lot of Atmos, but yeah, I think our Atmos is up there with some of the best out there. So
yeah, that's cool. That's cool to hear.
Especially our low end. That's where the big difference is.
Do you have an Atmos tip for low end, just real quick?
Yeah, if someone tells you not to use the LFE, do not listen.
Ooh.
And that's it. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Nice. I like it.
Commonplace. Yeah, Brendan did a lot. He's done a lot of 5.1 and 7.1, which leans heavily on LFE as well. So naturally scaling that up to 128 channels, like if you have 128 channels and you only use 127, like you're still not maximizing the capability of the format. So that's what cool we aim to do.
So in terms of the $1 Million Snare brand, what kind of caused you to make a TikTok, and is there anything coming in the future for the brand, like more?
Yeah, so I'm really focused in 2023 on developing my team. And I shared on a couple other interviews, like I do want to get more into the tech side of the engineering space, whether it's like developing, I don't really see us developing hardware, but I do want us to get more into like the R&D side of developing software, because we are power users of everything. And we, I want to be able to service people the way that we service them, like when we're mastering, right? Like with the highest level of sonic standards, as well as like, like how do we help people, and not just like, oh, how do we take as much money from people as possible. Like that's never been the goal, you know, which I feel like can get really tricky running a business. Like we strive to like, how do we help as many people as possible, even if it means forfeiting some revenue, like doing it ethically, doing it honestly. Like the other week, even someone was like, hey, you did 3 masters. Like I have a whole album. I was going to put out the whole thing, but I'm thinking of having you just remaster the whole thing. Like, what would you do? You know? And I could have said, hey, yeah, send me those 10 other songs, you know, take the $3,000+ right from them. And I told him like, yeah, it's probably not necessary. Like, don't hire me for that. Like, just hire me for future projects. Like, you're probably good to go putting this one out as is. If it's, you know, like how they described what they wanted to do. Like, it didn't require me doing any work on it or taking their money. Right. So we want to get into the software space with that same approach. Like, being of maximum service, the money will come, you know what I'm saying, if we're maximizing our value out into the recording community.